So the theme of tonight's talk is the three family protectors, and I'll say a little bit about that in a moment, but it comes in the context of the theme of the wheel and the spiral. So the wheel, the image you can see here representing the repetitive cycles that we can get lost in, or fueled by greed, ignorance and hatred, where we get lost in these semi-conscious patterns of behaviour which just lead us ever more into suffering, and these cycles of suffering. And then the spiral path is the path as described by the Buddha of practice, of discipline and practice, and transformation, which can lead us out of those semi-conscious, sort of cyclical, reactive states into ever more creative, beautified states, which culminate ultimately in the figure of the Buddha. So last week Mokshatara described the Buddha as an image representing the goal. This is what comes at the end of the spiral path, the end of that path out of suffering, out of reactive, cyclic mental states. So the Buddha, the Buddha is the goal, and he's one figure who embodies all these vast, rich qualities of enlightenment. But Mokshatara also drew out three primary aspects of the enlightenment experience, which were wisdom, which represents the cognitive dimension or aspect of the enlightenment, compassion or love, which represents the emotional dimension of the Buddha's enlightenment, and energy, which represents the volitional dimension of enlightenment. So these are sort of three ways that we can see enlightenment. And in the centuries after the Buddha's death, not only did we have this beautiful image of the Buddha appeared so that people could stay in touch with the figure of the Buddha, be inspired by him and follow his path, but we also had a series of other figures emerge out of the depths of people's meditation and inspiration, and they were sort of symbolic archetypal images which represented these three different aspects. So you could see enlightenment as a kind of great light and passing through a jewel. And as it passes through the jewel, the light is refracted almost into these kind of rainbow-like colours. And as it passes through this jewel, new colours and new lights come out. And these lights eventually sort of come to crystallise or form into clear images which are symbolic archetypal depictions of enlightenment. So these are the three family protectors. These were the first sort of developments within the imagery of Buddhism, and they are Manjughosha, who represents the wisdom aspect of enlightenment, Avalokiteshvara, representing the compassion aspect of enlightenment, and Vajrapani, representing the energy aspect of enlightenment. So they're known collectively as the three family protectors. That's, as I understand it, that's a translation of the Tibetan Riksum Gonpo. So another way it's often translated is the lords of the three families. And the three families, you could consider that over the centuries, ever more figures appeared, and they are associated with these figures, almost as if they're in a sort of archetypal or Buddha clan or a sort of Buddha family. So that's why they're called the three family protectors. But this afternoon, after sort of preparing to give the talk, it just really occurred to me that the theme of protection itself seems particularly sort of pertinent at the moment. It's definitely, if any of you read or avoid the news, you definitely get a sense that we're living in times of fear and anxiety. Maybe perhaps disproportionately so. But I suppose it made me aware that what we're all looking for, either through kind of ram-raiding Tesco's for toilet tissue or whatever we're doing, what we're looking for in one way or another is to be safe and secure, isn't it? We're looking for protection, effectively. And these figures are seen to be the three family protectors. So this suggests that they are a source of protection for us. But what does that mean? You know, what does it mean to be protected by the Dharma? One way we can see it is that by invoking these figures, dwelling on them, we can actually get in touch with these living forces of enlightenment, which can help to alleviate our fear, dispel our confusion, sort of subdue or calm our greed and calm our hatred, because those mental poisons are what get us into a hell of a lot of trouble in our lives. So actually, if we look to these figures, we can also delight in them, be inspired by them, and they'll sort of keep our minds on the straight and narrow, keep our energies aligned with the good, what's best in us, and keep us practicing and acting in line with our deepest values in a world which often tries to draw us away from what's of greatest importance to us. Yeah. So we can reference these figures almost as if they're a sort of pole star for us. You know, our kind of compass can point northwards, and if we keep our minds on these figures, either through meditation or devotion, then it's likely to keep us inspired, enriched, and keep us on the straight and narrow, and keep us leading us away from the wheel, leading us away from these reactive, cyclical mental states into creative, beautiful states of mind, states of connection with others, states of deep meaning. Okay. And just briefly as well, just to say something about, why an image itself, why are images important in the Dharma? So we have all of these, just vast array of teachings of the Buddha in words, things that we can understand, like the Four Noble Truths or the Eightfold Path. But we also have, I'm really pleased to say, just this sort of beautiful array of images, sort of pantheon of Buddhist deities who we can reflect on and can inspire us. Now, why an image? Well, we say that an image speaks 1,000 words, and I think that's a really good reason why we have images. So these images, what you could say is, if you look at these images, if you want... That was deliberate. So if you look at these images, then what you're actually looking at, is, if you want to know what the wisdom of the Buddha's enlightenment is, and I'm going to try and describe these later, but actually the best way you can do it is just look at that, yeah? Just look at that, and probably look at it for a long period of time, and bring it to mind every morning in meditation, and just sort of, sit contemplating that figure and let it just soak in, and just delight in it, savour it like a fine wine or something like that, and really that's one of the best ways to come to understand or develop a relationship with what is the Buddha's wisdom, in a way that no amount of words or descriptions or kind of trying to make sense of what it is could do it in the same way. Those things are extremely important, the Buddha's teachings in words, and at the same time there's something so essential in an image which communicates in a different way. This is the Buddha's compassion. That's what it is, yeah? That's what it looks like, you could say. And this is the Buddha's energy. Yeah, that's what it is. So I'll make that point. That is clear enough. So another one, so images, they can communicate something that words can't, and they can convey beauty as well. Yeah, they can convey the beauty of the enlightenment experience. These are just really deeply mysterious figures. You've got beings of different beautiful colours sitting on these lotuses of different colours. in these heavenly realms, of being surrounded with flames, deeply mysterious, magical, conveying something which is entirely beyond what we can currently imagine. So, yeah, just bring them to mind and see how they affect you. But what these, I've already said that they represent living forces of enlightenment which we can somehow tune into, the living forces of the Buddha's awakening. But also another way we can look at them is that this is you. So this is ultimately you. This is what you'll look like at the end of the path. If you pursue the Buddha's path to its complete culmination and you are transformed and your mind and your heart are awakened to the joy, beauty and bliss of enlightenment, that is what you will look like. Well, perhaps not literally. That's perhaps more how a Buddha perceives the world. That's what a Buddha would see. That's the potential that a Buddha would see in all beings. When the kind of what feel like these kind of really strong delineations and boundaries between ourselves and the world, whereby we feel alienated and separate, could fall away and we feel released and our energies released and our creativity released and we feel this boundless joy. That's what it's describing. That's the enlightenment, the vision of enlightenment that it's describing. So that's us at the end of the path. Okay. So I'm going to now talk about these figures one by one and describe the symbolism, but do remember that they speak for themselves. That's the main thing. Okay, so this is Manjugosha, so I'll introduce you to Manjugosha. Manjugosha is the representation of the Buddha's wisdom, the cognitive aspect of the Buddha's enlightenment. In his name, Manjugosha means the gentle-voiced one. Manju means gentle, and Gosha is voice. And another name for him is Manjushri, and that means the gently auspicious one. Really beautiful name. So wisdom speaks with a gentle voice. That's something you hear. I think it's a sort of biblical reference, actually. It's probably from the book of Ezekiel or something like that. And wisdom speaks with a gentle voice. So what that means for us is that in order to tune into the Buddha's wisdom, we can hear it when we are very, very, very quiet. So in the depths of meditation, when the mind is stilled, that's when we are susceptible to Manjugosha's voice. He holds this flaming sword above his head, so he's sort of a force to be reckoned with, but he also holds it in a very gentle way and in such a way as you don't think he's not going to harm you, but he's a deeply protective force. And it's the sword of wisdom. It's the sword which cuts through all of our deluded views, all of our senses of limitations that we can't be enlightened, we can't change, that other people can't be enlightened, can't change, that we're fixed, separate beings with limited potential, that the world's just the way it is, and we just have to get on with it and do our best because it's all a bit of a mess. Well, those are the kind of views that Manjugosha will challenge and cut through by bringing the Buddha's wisdom to bear on reality. And so it cuts through these views and our limitations, and it forges a clear path ahead. So if you imagine you could imagine Manjugosha sort of pointing the sword forwards. It gives us a sense of what is the right approach to this, what is a right view to apply to this situation. I'm in a situation where someone's shouting at me, how can I apply the Buddha's wisdom to this? How would I wield the sword in this situation? So we're always brought up with those challenges, and Manjugosha's sword is that element which brings clarity and directionality to our practice and lets us know which way is the way forward, forges a clear path ahead. He's an eternally youthful figure. Yeah, he's a prince, a beautiful young prince. And one thing this represents is that with Manjughosha, or inspired by Manjughosha, we don't get stuck in past regrets or confusions or limited views of ourselves. We can stay ever fresh, and we can stay freshly inspired. And also, whatever arises in our lives, we can look at it with fresh eyes, see the beauty, see the potential for growth, and see the potential for understanding and wisdom. So Manjughosha is an eternally youthful figure. He's continually inspired. So inspiration itself is youthful. Yeah, it's fresh. It's exciting. It's inspiring. He holds the Book of Wisdom to his heart. You can see it here. Okay, so the Book of Wisdom, what this is a book that if you were to read it, it would sort of dispel all of your delusions, and you would see enlightenment clearly. Yeah. So you've got to, if you want to know wisdom, you have to sort of petition Manjughosha for it. You have to recognise that wisdom can be found, and you sort of ask for that. So, what is the Buddha's wisdom? What is contained in that book? I really like Mokshitara's analogy last week of being on a walk in beautiful surroundings with a map. So the Buddha's teachings, like the Four Noble Truths and the teaching on the Eightfold Path and the Six Perfections and so on, we have all of these lists, and they're really important because they can get us in touch with a vision. If we practice them and apply them, they can get us in touch with a vision of enlightenment. But ultimately, wisdom is something which can't be put into words and can't be just taken literally or narrowed down to those lists and ideas. So the lists are represented in this analogy by the map, yeah, and the wisdom which is beyond words is represented by the countryside. So if we want to go on a walk in beautiful countryside, we need a map, we need the Buddha's teaching. But also, if we get too focused and too obsessed with the map, as in the Buddha's teaching on the Four Noble Truths, then we'll forget that actually the reason we came into the countryside was because we wanted to appreciate the beautiful surroundings, which is the Buddha's wisdom which goes beyond words. Anyway, I hope that makes sense to you. It made sense to me last week when Mokshitara described it, so I thought I'd bring this up again. His mantra is Om Arapacha Nadi, okay, and this is one story of this mantra is that it comes from the alphabet of the gods, so it represents the sort of quintessence of communication. If you imagine the gods gave the seeds and the possibility of communication to man, well, the alphabet of the gods starts Om Arapacha Na. Yeah, it starts Arapacha Na, I should say. And D itself is a symbol which represents wisdom. So chanting this mantra dispels delusion, and it aligns us with Manjughosha's wisdom. It represents the essence of communication. And he's also another name for Manjughosha is Vagishvara, which means Lord of Speech. So he's said to speak to all beings everywhere in their language and in a way which they can understand. So all of us here will have encountered something, we'll all be here for very similar reasons, and maybe wanting to find meaning in our lives, but also the Dharma will have spoken to us, each in very individual ways which really speak to our heart as individuals. So Manjughosha speaks the Buddha's wisdom to every being in their own language, but he speaks it to them in a way which will inspire them and they can understand. Yeah, and he's beautiful, rich, princely, colourful, covered in silks. He's this kind of rich, amber-like colour, imagining sort of the sunlight coming through a piece of amber. golden sort of warm colour. The colour of, I think his time of day is the dawn, so you imagine the dawn sun, it's just starting to warm up the world. Okay, so how can we relate on our level to these sort of almost godlike figures? Well, the way which made most sense to me to do this is to mention a few people who I know are sort of devotees of these figures, because that will give you a sense of how the qualities which are in these images in their perfection can be reflected in our own kind of human ways on our own level. So the first person I'm going to talk about is Vidanya. So Vidanya, as I understand it, is a Manjughosha devotee. Am I right? I hope so, because otherwise that's going to ruin the talk. Thank you. Vidanya. So Vidanya, yeah. So his name means eloquent. Is that one a good enough translation? Yeah. So many of you will know from having been to Sangha Night that one thing Vidanya can do and appears to enjoy doing very much is speaking, talking Dharma. And it really fascinates me when Vidanya gives a talk or when I read a piece of study material which he's written. The fact that he's been able to just describe things in such a progressive, successive way that it makes sense, and it's almost like there's this kind of argument, not conflict, but this argument to the Dharma, which is almost like he's thought it through in such a way as I can't think it through any better. And so when I'm reading his study material, if I want to sort of know what the main points of a particular sutra are, I can often reliably just look at what questions Vidanya has written, because often that will be actually, no, those are the main points. And I find it quite, really, really great qualities. And I think another thing that reminds me of Manjughosha's qualities, which is seen in Vidanya, is just these sort of princely qualities. So I think one thing is that he's really generous, yeah, so it's sort of almost like a kind of sense of nobility. He really gives so much. He's very prolific in his Dharma teaching, offering the Dharma, but also in supporting others to teach, like offering suggestions for the themes of talks. And it's just like he just keeps doing that again and again and again. He's sort of really prolific. And the other thing, finally, so as not to embarrass him further, I'd say one other thing I see in Vidanya is that I find him very youthful, in the sense that he's always inspired. He seems like he's always inspired and freshly inspired. So there's this kind of upwelling source of inspiration which doesn't seem to go away for any period of time. So we see that. So we might not be these figures yet, but their qualities can imbue our beings, and they can be reflected into the world. And if we devote ourselves to imagining and connecting with these figures, they can do so ever more. Avalokiteshvara. Avalokiteshvara represents the compassion or the love aspect of the Buddha's enlightenment, the emotion aspect. His name, Avalokiteshvara, so one way it can be translated is the Lord who looks down with eyes of compassion on the world. He sees the world with eyes of compassion. And in this form, there are various forms to Avalokiteshvara, but in this form you'll see him as a four-armed form. He represents the bodhicitta, the awakened heart. So it's the heart that awakens in us when we have a vision of enlightenment, and we see that we can't ever completely separate the desire for our own happiness with the desire for the welfare of others. So when we're transformed by the bodhicitta, our life becomes one of serving the welfare of others and bringing them to the beauty, bliss and joy and wisdom of enlightenment. So this is, in a way, that's That's what this vision of the bodhicitta looks like. In one hand here, he holds a lotus flower. And one way we could consider that is that the lotus flower represents the beauty of the fully awakened mind, the open and liberated mind that sees life clearly. And this represents the culmination of human awakening and transformation. And he also, in his right hand here, it'd be quite hard to see, it's almost in a sort of infinity shape here, is a crystal rosary. A crystal is something which is really pure, sort of pure like the heart of Avalokiteshvara, like that vivid white colour, which he is. So, we recite mantras on a rosemary. I see it as a symbol of our Buddhist practice. So a crystal rosary is a symbol in one way of this purity of practice. So Avalokiteshvara's practice is completely purified. It's totally pure. And also, because Avalokiteshvara represents compassion and metta and loving kindness, you can never get to the end of a rosary. You can recite mantras forever. And you could also see that there's no end to practicing metta, there's no end to practicing compassion, there's no end to benefiting others or helping them to develop towards enlightenment. So there's no end to Avalokiteshvara's mala, there's no end to this pure practice of the bodhicitta. And this is the bodhicitta of this blue stone which he holds to his heart. It's what's most precious to him. This beautiful jewel, which represents his vision of the potential of all beings. And it's sort of, I like that the bodhicitta is sort of outside his body, because it's not his, but it's also, it's not entirely his, but it's not entirely other either. It's almost like it's a nexus between which Avalokiteshvara interacts with the world and represents this perfect vision. Another image of Avalokiteshvara, which some of you might be more familiar with, is the 1,000-armed, 11-headed Avalokiteshvara. So you might have seen it before as a symbol of Sangha, of the spiritual community. So I know there's an image somewhere where people's faces make up the hands of Avalokiteshvara. So another way of looking at the bodhicitta, so you can see the bodhicitta as something which arises in an individual where their heart is transformed and wants to serve the welfare of all beings. But you could also see it as a shared vision, something that all of us are inspired by and partake in. And by coming along here, we try and partake in that vision. And those 1,000 arms can represent each one of these hands. Can represent a single individual in their own way, offering something to the world through, based on what they can do. Can they give a talk? Can they make the tea? Can they be a friend? Yeah. So all of these different hands can represent a different individual who's able to offer something different, which contributes towards realising this shared vision of the bodhicitta. So perhaps we could even just see a bodhisattva not as this individual being, but as a sort of, a supra-personal force, the word which you might hear one day, but which I'm not going to talk about now. But so you could see a bodhisattva as, rather than just an individual being or an individual awakening, a sort of stream of volition which we can all partake in and do so collectively. So the image of the 1,000-armed Avalokiteshvara comes from a myth or story about the figure. So, according to this story, Avalokiteshvara made a vow to his teacher, who was the Buddha Amitabha, the red Buddha Amitabha, the Buddha of love, that he was so, when the bodhicitta arose in him, he was so profoundly aware of the needs of others, and wanted to spend his life benefiting others and bringing them to enlightenment, and so affected by that he made a vow that he was going to pursue the welfare of others. But if at any point, to protect this vow, he also said that if at any point I should turn away from serving the welfare of others and just forget about it and focus on my own happiness alone, then at that time may my head split into 11 pieces and may my body shatter into 1,000 pieces. So he made this vow, which is quite an undertaking. So the story continues that then he spent these ages, these aeons, benefiting beings by helping them, seeing their suffering and going to them and teaching the Dharma or just alleviating their suffering on a simple level. But when he looked down after many ages and he saw these beings, he saw that what he'd done was it didn't even scratch the surface. People were still in these profound states of suffering or just struggling to, eat and drink. And he was so kind of affected by this, and that he was so demoralized that for just one moment he let doubt enter his mind, and he thought, well, what if this is impossible? What if I were to turn away and just leave beings and try and gain enlightenment for myself? And at that moment, the vow was kind of invoked. He's made this vow, he's got to live by it. And vows are quite dangerous things, beware of vows. Don't take vows to give up chocolate or something like that. They really are. In Buddhism, they're very serious things. You should be very careful before taking on a vow in the context of the Dharma. His body's shattered into 1,000 pieces and his head split into 11 pieces, and he was utterly shattered. But at that moment he called out in pain and called out for mercy to his teacher Amitabha, the red Buddha, who came to him, and out of compassion and out of his confidence and because of the vow he made, he pieced together Avalokiteshvara and transformed him into this 11-headed form where he could see in all directions of space. He could see all beings in all directions of space, and he now had 1,000 arms, and with these 1,000 arms he could reach out and benefit beings even more. So that's the story of Avalokiteshvara, and that's something, I suppose, it speaks for itself. His mantra is Om Mani Padme Hum. One translation of this is to do with the jewel in the lotus. So Mani Padme is the jewel in the lotus, and that is the bodhicitta, the most beautiful and precious potential of the human heart. Okay. So again, to sort of bring this down to our human level, someone I wanted to mention tonight, and these are all going to be men. I did think of women, but it's just based on my experience of people I know and have enough awareness of. I thought I'd just stick to men because I don't know any women who are devotees of these things. Amalasiddhi, who I live with, is someone I wanted to mention who's Avalokiteshvara devotee. And one thing that strikes me about Amalasiddhi is that he's someone who I feel like when I'm with him, I can just be myself. He's very, 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 very accepting. I don't feel like I need to put on a front. If I'm upset, I don't feel like I need to pretend that I'm something other than upset. If I'm anxious, I don't need to pretend that I'm something else. So he just puts me at my ease because he's very accepting of us in whatever state we find ourselves. He's available to people. He's always available. Even if I don't know, he's cooking in the kitchen and Nora is shouting for yogurt or whatever. He's still available, which is quite extraordinary. But yeah, he responds to people, and I see, because I live with him, I see him just constantly responding to the needs of those of us around him. And it's very important to him that through his work and his involvement in the centre, his work at the cafe, that his energies are going towards something which is benefiting other people. I think when he's not benefiting other people, he really questions what he's doing. Yes, it's really important to him to be doing that. And finally, having worked in the Dharma Cafe kitchen, I know that in the process of preparing 10 full veggie breakfasts, that a multiplicity of hands will very much come, be of great use. So, yeah, good. Okay. Vajrapani, yeah. Representing the energy aspect, the volitional aspect of the Buddha's enlightenment. The holder of the Vajra, that's what his name means. So, it's a very small Vajra in relation to his enormous proportions. But the Vajra is a symbol of reality, a symbol of the Buddha's enlightenment. And the Vajra is a diamond thunderbolt. So it's a symbolic instrument. I don't have one to hand. Oh well, he does. So it's a symbolic instrument which has all of the clarity and indestructibility of a diamond, combined with the immense power of a thunderbolt. If you imagine in the times where this image came about, probably the most immense force that anyone could even conceive of would be thunder, this natural force. So it's immensely powerful, it's entirely indestructible, and it's completely clear. And the Vajra represents the Buddha's vision of the truth of the way things are. The Buddha sees truth, he communicates truth, and the truth of the matter is indestructible. So however hard we might try by lying or disguising, we can't destroy the truth which the Vajra represents. But you can see that Vajrapani is a formidable character, so we need to be careful when we lie. We need to be careful when we're in denial, because although we can't destroy the truth could destroy us. So to do with that, I've got a story to do with Vajrapani, because he was the earliest bodhisattva to emerge within this pantheon, and he figures in the Pali Canon in a sutta called the Ambata Sutta. And Ambata was a very proud young man who approached the Buddha, and he considered him to be Ambata considered himself to be of very kind of noble birth. He considered himself to be kind of high caste, and he came along to the Buddha, and he was very disparaging, and he was very conceited and disparaging of the Buddha, and sort of dismissing him on the basis of their relative social position, looking down at the Buddha of being of a lower caste. So the Buddha challenged Ambata and said, this isn't the way that one speaks to another, this isn't the way that one entreats another to receive a teaching. And he challenges Ambata, and he tells him a story. He says, Ambata, is it not true, despite what you say, that although you feel that you are of great descendancy from this clan, that actually your clan is descended from a servant girl of my clan? Is this not true, Ambata? And he says to Ambata, now before you answer, Ambata, be very, very careful, because if you lie, your head will be smashed into pieces. And just at that moment, Vajrapani appears above the Buddha's head, wielding this Vajra. And this terrifying image, that at that point Ambata has to concede and tell the truth. Ambata has to tell the truth and say, yes, that's true. So he couldn't lie to the Buddha, he couldn't lie in the face of Vajrapani. And then the Buddha goes on to teach that one shouldn't value oneself or others on the basis of social position, caste or any kind of status, but only on the basis of one's wisdom and spiritual growth. And one shouldn't have pride in one's birth position. Yeah. It's wisdom and spiritual development, which are qualities which one should admire and look up to. So we could see, one way we could consider Vajrapani is all of those powerful, natural, aggressive forces in us, or in this case in the Buddha, transformed and harnessed in the service of what's of deepest meaning and what's of greatest good. And in that sense, because the Buddha his energies are completely integrated, Vajrapani represents a tremendous energy, which if you're going to challenge the Buddha, you're going to come up against that energy, because the Buddha's energies are completely united. So Vajrapani is massive, yeah, it's massive, and he's blue. So if you imagine that when energy, we talk about energy welling up within us, and in meditation, often when we look at descriptions of higher meditative states, we use metaphors to do with water welling up from depths, and water is a representation of the unconscious mind. So you could imagine that these great forces of the unconscious mind have welled up into Vajrapani and filled him into this enormous being. And it's almost like his energy is as vast as the sky, the blue sky, as vast as the great universe. He's surrounded by flames. Fire is a source of energy, isn't it? It's a ferocious force. It can be a destructive force, but it can also be it's also what keeps us warm and safe. And he's striding on, in this case, you can see this is golden, it's normally white. Normally figures sit on a moon mat, but in the case of wrathful figures like Vajrapani, he's standing on a sun mat. And again, the sun is something which is massively energetic. It creates heat, it creates light. You can't even look directly into it. And at the same time, it gives life, it gives warmth, it keeps us alive and safe. We wouldn't be anywhere without it. And he's striding forwards. He's not sitting cross-legged, he's striding forwards. And you could see this as the unstoppable force of the Dharma in the world. When we practice the Dharma, it can have the effect, when we practice ethics, when we practice meditation, it can have the effect of destroying obstacles, of wiping obstacles out of the way. What once might have seemed like a massive thing, we might, have got angry about something. Now we're able to see it in perspective, and we're much bigger, bigger like Vajrapani, and we can swipe away obstacles. I wondered, he often looked angry to me, certainly fierce, but recently Arloka, who's an artist who painted so many images in the Padmaloka Shrine and produced wrathful Vajrapani, and in that image this tremendous energy looked more than anger, looked like just utterly ecstatic. So I see the figure of Vajrapani as being an ecstatic figure. Just the energy is completely ecstatic. He's got a tiger's skin, sort of loincloth. It's representing those animal forces, those forces of nature in the service of what's highest in us. And the person that reminds me of Vajrapani, as he's a devotee of Vajrapani, is one of my friends, Sangha Night from Padmaloka, who, one of the reasons he reminds me of this is because he's really into physical and mental discipline, sort of one-arm push-ups and all sorts of crazy things like that. But he just seems to love the discipline. When he's not disciplining himself in the gym, definitely not the gym. When he's not disciplining himself in the gym, he's disciplining himself in terms of thinking how, he wrote an email to me at the beginning of the year thinking, I want to become at least 50% more productive, and how can I do that? So he tries to make himself more productive in his work. But he just loves these challenges. He loves to be challenged, and that brings him meaning. And he can summon energy behind discipline. He's got a sort of warrior mentality which allows him to develop. And he really takes on big projects and challenges. So he is the chairman at Pamaloka, and I worked with him as the manager, and he'd sort of kind of vision all these projects, and I'd often be the one who'd be trying to put them into practice. So it was often a case of just trying to keep up with Sangha vision. But to be fair, he'd been the manager himself, so he'd kind of gone through that process. He knew what was involved, and he knew my limitations as well, I think. But he also, he's not shy of adversity. He's gone through a lot of adversity in his own life, and in terms of the challenges of his work, and he'll step into it. He'll really kind of step forwards into it. And he also likes wearing the colour blue, which, although it might sound a bit kind of superficial, sometimes those things are quite important. So those are the three family protectors. They're protectors. Remember that they're protectors. They can be a refuge for us when living in a world which appears to be threatening, devoid of meaning sometimes, where it appears to us that there's no way out, there's no refuge. We can turn to these figures for inspiration and a sense of security. And security comes from practicing the Buddha's path and trying to take on these qualities and grow in the light of them. That's what gives us security. So I'm going to finish with some verses which invoke this sense of protection, the sense of these powerful protectors, which is from our sevenfold puja, and it's the verses of going for refuge. This very day I go for my refuge to the powerful protectors whose purpose is to guard the universe, the mighty conquerors who overcome suffering everywhere. Wholeheartedly also I take my refuge in the Dharma they have ascertained, which is the abode of security against the rounds of rebirth. Likewise, in the host of bodhisattvas, I take my refuge.